the usual means of baptism that Lutherans practice is pouring water on the head 3 times. Sprinkling would also be a valid form of baptism in our view. The normal argument is an etymological argument that baptizo and baptismos, the Greek words, mean immerse and immersion, respectively. And this is an example of an etymological fallacy, because it's true that the word bapto originally meant to dip, and that baptizo would be a intensified form of that, like to dip a lot or to dip deeply or to dip seriously or something like that. But words mean what people use them to mean. And you can see, for instance, in the Gospels when Jesus talks about the Pharisees having a habit of washing many different things ritually, including couches. The word he uses there is baptizo. They baptize their couches. This probably does not mean that they were actually taking couches and fully submersing them in water and then hoping that they dried out without mildew. This is an example of a word that at some point meant to immerse and then generally meant to wash, and especially to wash in a ritual sense. And we use words like this all the time. It's a principle of language that a word's meaning is determined by its usage and not by its etymological derivation from some word in the past. And so other arguments such as that John the Baptist baptized in a river. Well, he baptized in a river because there was a lot of water there. It was a logical place to baptize. Perhaps the people were being immersed, perhaps they weren't. It doesn't actually say. When Jesus came up out of the water and the Holy Spirit came down upon him, if you read that carefully, you'll realize that it's when he came up out of the river. He came up out of the water in that sense. That is, his feet were out of the river. He was back up on the bank. If you compare the Gospels, Luke says clearly that the Holy Spirit came upon him when he was out of the river and praying afterwards. You compare the Gospels, you see that is the meaning there. But if they did immerse in the New Testament, that's fine. Immersion is a perfectly good means of baptism. And you could argue, as Baptists often do, from Romans chapter 6, that immersion is a particularly good symbol or form of baptism because of the way it symbolizes burial with Christ and rising with Christ. It is, of course, ironic that they make that argument and at the same time deny that baptism actually buries you and rises you with Christ in a salvific way that ties your destiny to his. But it does mean that it would be a good symbol. But of course, pouring is also a good symbol. Pouring reminds you that baptism gives you the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit is poured out on all flesh, as St. Peter quotes from the prophet Joel in the day of Pentecost. And so this is a case of Christian freedom. Symbolisms, sprinkling, pouring, immersing, they all have their symbolic strong suits. But in our day, Lutherans usually do not immerse. And one reason that we usually do not immerse is because there are people out there who insist that it absolutely must be done that way or else it's not true baptism. And we don't want any of our people to think that we are capitulating to that and thereby calling into question their own baptism, which was not by immersion, because that's not traditionally what we have done. And so it is a tradition that we pour, and we don't usually immerse, but it is, in either way, a baptism. And there is a early first century document from the church called the Didache. And the Didache, as it gives guidelines for how you ought to baptize, it does mention immersion as the preferred method, specifically immersion in running water, which most baptistries do not have, I believe. Immersion in running water, and if you don't have running water, then immersion in still water, and if you don't have enough water for that, then you can pour or sprinkle. And so it is clear that in the author and the community of the Didache, immersion was in fact the preferred method, but they clearly also recognized pouring and sprinkling as being valid forms of baptism and perfectly comporting with what Jesus was talking about, which means that within 100 years of Jesus' death, they clearly recognized that baptizo and baptismos did not mean only to immerse.